I want to explain these numbers and letters right down here at the bottom. So this is what we call a citation, right? And I'm sorry if I'm dumbing this down too much and you're like, oh my gosh, Jody, I already know that. That's not something that everybody always knows. So, and even if you do know that it's a citation, I bet you that I'm going to tell you something on the next slide that you didn't know. If I'm wrong, I apologize. So here's a quick reference, and there's a little bit more in the book about it, but I'm briefly going to explain these to you. If you have a copy of the book, you're going to see these citations throughout the book. I tried to put them everywhere I could. The purpose of that is so that you can find what the law actually says. What you're reading in the book is my take on the law. It's what I think the law says, right? If you want to actually verify that the words in the law match my interpretation of it or what I'm putting in that book, look up the citation. A quick Google search of any of these will give you the law, and you can read the actual text of the law. So we've got federal and state. We're also looking at statutes and regulations. So how does this break down? Well, when you see this, USC, that stands for the United States Code. The education part of the United States Code is in Title 20, so that's that 20 right before it. And this specifies what section of that Title 20 is specifically, this is where special education starts. The laws about special education are going to start at Section 1400. So a lot of the citations to IDEA are going to be things like 20 USC Section 1445 or something like that, because that's where this section of law is covered. Now for state, if you're outside of California, your state has its own education code. That's where you're going to see a lot of the state regulations. So, or state statute, excuse me. So the federal statute, like I said, it puts out those minimums. This is our federal minimum. You want our money, you got to at least do this. Every state has to have statutes that say how they're going to implement what IDEA requires. So sometimes they look very, very similar. Sometimes their wording is exactly the same. Other times it varies a little bit. But as long as it doesn't run afoul of IDEA, as long as it meets those minimums, it can do more. It just can't contradict those minimums or give less. But every state has to have its own education code for explaining their own statute that says how they're going to apply it in their state. Okay, so here we're looking at the Code of Federal Regulations. So what happens is Congress passes a statute, right? Great intentions, but they don't think of everything. They miss the ball sometimes, or they word it wrong, or it's not clear enough, or they missed something. So a regulation is going to kind of be filling in some of those blanks. So a lot of times 34 CFR is going to match the language of 20 USC very closely. Other times it might vary a little bit, just like our state ones. Our state statute varied from the federal statute. But again, it's a regulation which talks about how we intend to implement the statute. And same thing on our state side. So now we're looking at the California Code of Regulations. Title 5 is on education. Section 3000 starts the special education. So that's kind of a breakdown of what those different citations mean. So going back, and real quickly, we are going to cover some case law. In the book, every once in a while, you come across case law. So if it's something that the judicial branch issued, it'll be what we call it a case. So here's a citation for Brown versus Board of Education. And it's usually going to look like this or something along these lines. There's a lot about what all these numbers and letters, these numbers mean and things, but we don't really need to go into that so much. It's just a way for you to understand that this means the judicial branch is trying to interpret what one of these up here means, right? Every state has statutes and regulations about how they're going to implement IDEA. They have to be provided in conformity with those state statutes and regulations, which in turn have to be cohesive with the federal statutes and regulations as well. So it's all tied together.